and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Today we have a really exciting impact webinar, and some of you might have seen some of the work that we're going to hear about today on the Four Corners project that was aired probably about 3 months ago, I think. But today we have Associate Professor Michael Falster and Dr. Malcolm Gillies talking to us about linked national data at speed to advanced quality use of medicine research in Australia. Both Malcolm and Michael are from the UNSW Centre for Research Excellence in Medicines Intelligence, and they're going to be talking to us about how they had access to ADHD medicine prescription data and outcomes across Australia using the ABS PLIDA, and also some additional work that they've been doing using the GLP-1 medicines. We're really excited to hear what is actually possible when you can get access to data at speed, and to have a bit of a discussion around what are the things that we can do in Australia and what is needed to really improve this system. There will be opportunities for Q&A, so please just pop your questions in the Q&A, and we will move straight on to Michael and Malcolm. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rebecca, and thank you, Data Connect. It's a real privilege to be presenting our research today. Just checking that you can see the slides and it's ready to go. Excellent. Just first of all, the disclosures of our team about where we've received research funding. And today we're talking about linking national data at speed to advance quality use of medicines research in Australia. And after we pitched this title, we sort of stepped back and thought, well, what exactly do we mean by speed? There are so many different factors in play. We have the process and efficiency for approvals and data governance. How quickly can we actually bring data together across sectors? Whether data is contemporary and how long it takes for us to be able to get data that's reflective of emerging issues in contemporary practice, as well as the hands-on side in terms of how quickly we can access and analyze data in the process of moving results to publication. For everyone who uses these type of population level data assets, we know these are all enablers of timely, impactful research. They're all interconnected and they all relate to the speed in which we can do our research and get our results out. So to try to frame the talk today, we're just going to quickly talk first about who we are and the Medicines Intelligence Research Program and the type of data that we're using. And then we're going to unpack 2 case studies, as Rebecca flagged, one around cardiometabolic medicines at hospitalization to flag what we can do with this enabling infrastructure, linking data sets between sectors. And then Malcolm's going to be talking about mapping adult ADHD medicine use in adults, which is really about the potential of what we can do where we can get this data out at speed. And that's really around the Four Corners report that Rebecca flagged, which aired just a few months ago. So first, here's a recent picture of our team. Who are we? Medicines Intelligence Research Program. We're a multidisciplinary team, including epidemiologists, clinicians, data managers, biostatisticians. We're a fun group. We love research and we love lunch. The overarching goal of our research program is really to improve quality use of medicines and reduce medicine-related harm. Our work is often in partnership with clinicians, policymakers, and consumers to really understand and inform the use and impact of medicines in routine clinical care. And our aim is our research leads to smarter and safer medicine use, both improving health system performance and, of course, the health of both individuals and the health of people at the population level. We have a bit of diverse expertise in our research program that covers the spectrum of real-world evidence around quality use of medicines. This includes expertise in data, methods, policy, and while we work across many clinical areas, we have particular strengths in our team around cancer, mental health and addiction, cardiometabolic disease, and pain. Our whole program is underpinned by really robust ethics, governance, and analytic expertise in the use of linked population level data and enduring research-ready data infrastructure that basically allows us to operate at a programmatic level, covering this huge diversity of clinical topics. I'll also flag UNSW as the central hub of the Medicines Intelligence Centre for Research Excellence, which is led by Professor Sally Pearson. This is a national network with multidisciplinary expertise, including academics, policymakers, consumers, and clinicians. If you're interested in getting in touch, you can find the CRE in LinkedIn, or you can email at the email address below to join the mailing list. It's a really open, welcome group, and we love building expertise in people who are interested in quality use of medicines across Australia. So I'm sure many of you here today are very data aware, and we all know there are multiple data assets and opportunities for people who want to engage in population level research. The Data Connect Australia, formerly PHRN, have really helped many people in navigating this space. And if we want population level linked data, we're often faced with many decisions around which pathway we'd like to take. Right now, this might look like a few options like PLIDA, the National Health Data Hub, or less common these days, bespoke linkages. But this wasn't always the case. And a few years ago, our options were actually really limited. And this was a really long and slow path in terms of getting linked population level data for research. To set the scene, I'm going to briefly talk about our journey establishing a linked data population asset before I head into the case studies. And this is the Medicines Intelligence Data Platform, which underpins a lot of the work in our team at the moment. There's more information available on our website or in a data profile publication if you're interested in knowing more. And development of this asset was led by Sally Pearson with support of a pretty amazing team. It started from a need to identify a person-level data platform which was fit for purpose to generate real-world evidence on use, effectiveness, and safety of prescribed medicines in Australia. The journey involved first identifying existing data collections. At the time, that included National Data Linkage Demonstration Project, NECE, and MADEP, precursors to a lot of the data we're using now, assessing if they'd meet our needs and if there was a clear pathway for access. And at the time, there really wasn't a suitable data set for us. The second option then was to build our own asset. And we initially considered that this would need to be a national data asset, but the sheer number of approvals needed was simply impractical to get it over the line, leading to us developing a population level linkage across the whole of New South Wales. This is a bit of a map of the journey it took in terms of getting all the approvals. I won't go through the whole journey, but it was about 4 years of approvals and processes from the beginning to actually getting the final tick of approval in terms of the governance putting this data set together. So it started in mid-2018 and the process of approvals ended in mid-2022. And I think we received the data in late 2023. So quite a long journey ahead of us. But it was really worth it. From this data set, we have linked Commonwealth data, including medicines dispensed through the PBS, claims through the MBS, and mortality data, linked with state level data on hospitalizations, ED presentations, and cancer, and all linked with the Medicare Consumer Directory as our spine. It means we have data for about 7.4 million people over close to a 20-year period, which for a data nerd like me is all up around 4.5 billion records, which is pretty amazing. Now, this talk is around linking national data at speed. And so you're probably asking yourself, Michael, what's so fast about that? 5 years is not speedy. Come on, move on. This is the process that we needed to go through, but there's obviously large changes in the data landscape these days with assets such as PLIDA and the National Health Data Hub. It's important to note that no one data asset meets all the needs for researchers, and we still need to carefully consider which pathway we're going down. But definitely, the investment in data infrastructure can keep massive rewards, and there's still work to be done in terms of building that capacity and bringing things together. So in this, now we're going to move into the case studies where I really want to talk about some of the key enabling parts of this infrastructure around the population level linked data that has been beneficial to us. And I think this is mostly across these two dimensions around linking data across sectors and linking data quickly. So first, linking data across sectors, I'm going to give an exemplar of a research program I lead around cardiometabolic medicines at hospitalization. And in fact, my interest in this topic was really sparked by the National Data Linkage Demonstration Project, which was the precursor to the National Health Data Hub when there was the first population level linkage of Commonwealth and state level data sets. We were involved in this, doing a research project demonstrating the value of linking this data together by exploring patient journeys for cardiovascular disease, and in particular, the use of cardiometabolic medicines at hospital discharge for different types of cardiovascular conditions. And this really sparked a lot of my interest. And that's because hospitalization is a really critical opportunity for optimization of therapy. This is where you can initiate new therapies, particularly for really acute conditions such as people having a heart attack. You can ensure people continue using medicines for prevention as an opportunity to check in and make sure people are getting the right medicines and adhering to it. And also managing the risk of multi-medicine use, because people are often very sick using a large number of medicines where there's potential risks of complications emerging. And I'm going to give some really quick examples in our research where we've looked at and explored all of these different factors. So first are people initiating therapies. This has been a really hot topic in clinicians, in particular in clinical networks, where people want to understand, can we optimize therapy and how do we ensure that patients are getting the right treatment at the right point in time? This paper here is an example where an emerging issue was around the use of new cardiometabolic medicines, SGLT2I therapies, which were initially used for treatment of diabetes, but have been expanding for use in indications across a whole bunch of conditions, including heart failure. And a big question was, these are now a central pillar of treatment. How quickly are they being adopted in routine clinical care? And are people getting these new highly beneficial medicines that are going to greatly reduce the potential complications and readmissions for heart failure? So we looked at how many people who are being hospitalized for heart failure and with type 2 diabetes were actually using these medicines. And we found first that there was a huge uptake. There was a really rapid increase over time, which is really great news that the evidence was being adopted. But we also saw that this was actually perhaps not quite fast enough, and the utilization was a lot lower than we were expecting. Here we had found in previous research around 30% of people being treated with type 2 diabetes were using these medicines. But then when you look at the subset of people with heart failure and diabetes, it's about half that rate, 13%. These are really high-risk people who are clearly indicated and will get the benefit. And this was raising alarms for us. I think one thing I'd like to flag here is some of these conditions like heart failure, we can't look at without hospitalization data linked together, because it's not possible to identify these people in data sets like the PBS alone. So until we produce these results, we really had a black hole of information about how rapidly these medicines were being adopted. And it's clear we need to do ongoing surveillance to see whether this is improving over time. As we were producing this, another hot topic emerged, which was from the clinician in our team, Tamara Mulder, who was hearing the clinical networks. There were a lot of concerns about the language being used in people in hospitalization may actually be causing a risk of inadvertent discontinuation. And that's because these medicines often need to be paused when people are hospitalized to minimize risk and restarted when people leave. But the language being used was often things like people need to cease therapy and people need to stop therapy. We know that often people don't reconnect with GPs and clinicians once they leave hospital. And so was this actually having an impact on whether people were sticking with these really critical medicines? So we looked at people who are hospitalized who are already using the medicines, and we found that actually a huge proportion of people were stopping and never restarting again. So we found almost a third of people never filled another prescription 3 months after they left, and most of these people didn't fill another prescription for another year. Again, this was a huge black hole where we had no information and were able to jump on a question that was being raised in clinical networks very, very, very quickly and rapidly. It was exciting, but it also raised a number of other questions. How often do people discontinue medicines? Is this just reflective of usual patterns of care? And hospitalization is meant to be a point for optimization of therapy. Is it actually potentially disruptive? Lots of questions, and I'm kind of happy to say we've answered some of those with a publication that was published just 2 days ago. So hot off the press, and it's wonderful to be able to share this. I won't go into the methods too deep, but we looked at people who are initiating these SGLT2 medicines as well as other diabetes medicines, and we looked at their follow-up over time until when they discontinued therapy, and we looked at a whole range of predictors about whether people were going to stop therapy. But the most important one was looking at hospitalization in this course of follow-up and seeing if rates of discontinuation were higher when it coincided with the time when someone was admitted to hospital. And what we found was it was, in fact, a really strong predictor of discontinuation. We found that the hazard ratios that we found for discontinuation around hospitalization were about 1.8 for SGLT2s, which was actually quite huge. And it was one of the strongest predictors that we found out of all of the demographic and clinical factors we examined. It was stronger than age, it was stronger than sex, it was stronger than geographic remoteness, and it was stronger than all of our markers of comorbidity and polypharmacy. So again, this is a really interesting and exciting finding. We hadn't really seen any other studies that have investigated this, which has actually flagged a whole big topic around connecting with primary care services at hospital discharge that we wouldn't have been able to identify without this linkage of data across sectors and without being able to rapidly respond to the clinical questions being, raised in the data, in the existing infrastructure and governance we had in place. And the final results I'm going to show around this is again around this issue of optimizing therapy at hospital discharge. We know that polypharmacy is a really big issue at the moment. And in particular in Europe, we're seeing a large focus on, concerns around managing polypharmacy and treatment inertia in heart failure and making sure that people are getting the balance of medicines right, including both using the guideline concordant therapies as well as making sure people aren't using medicines that are known to increase risk and harm, and deprescribing these medicines where it's appropriate. So we identified a new position paper, which from the European Society of Cardiology, which was detailing types of medicines that may actually be potentially inappropriate in people with heart failure that may exacerbate the risk of complications or readmission. And we applied this to our medicines intelligence data, and we found a lot of people hospitalized by heart failure were using these medicines. On average, people were using a lot of medicines, about 8 before they came into admission into hospital, and that almost 2/3 of people were dispensing medicines known to potentially exacerbate risk. And this tended to continue on both before and after people were admitted. About half the people using these medicines were known to have dispensed a medicine with a major magnitude effect, where there's potentially a very serious consequence or adverse outcome. And 1/3 of people were using 2 or more medicines. So again, another huge issue of quality use of medicines that we were almost completely blind to without having this population level data that connects medicine use with hospitalization. So I won't go through any more results here so we can move to the next study. But what was really exciting is that producing these results meant our findings could shape these discussions around quality use of cardiometabolic medicines. These were all emerging topics that were really interesting and really exciting, and having the enduring data linkage with appropriate governance in place meant that we were able to inform our partners in terms of monitoring uptake of new therapies. There was a lot of interest in developing performance indicators for routine surveillance of, post-hospital medicine use, and our methods would be able to be applied in that context. And also these discussions around deprescribing and how to rationalize the use of medicines at hospital discharge. But I think a really important factor that I need to flag is that we leveraged the most contemporary linked data that was available in Australia at the time. But for all the studies above, the data actually didn't align with the current clinical guidelines, where there had been a lot of movement over time. And in publishing some of these, some of the comments would say, okay, well, the clinical guidelines have changed. Is this data out of date? And it was quite exciting to have this data, but the gap between the discussion and what we had available was definitely something that we know can help build capacity in the future. And the conversation in this space is really quickly evolving. There's so much happening right now in terms of cardiometabolic medicines. I didn't talk too much around things like GLP-1s at the moment. And one of the reasons why is because the data just is a little bit out of date. Right now, there have been paradigm shifting changes to clinical guidelines where the whole rule book in terms of managing interconnected cardiovascular, metabolic, and kidney diseases are changing. There's these new cardiometabolic medicines are central to treatment of things like obesity, and basically the guidelines are changing every year. And so there's a lot of questions around quality use that we want to be able to address to keep up with the conversation ASAP. We're seeing rapid explosion in the use of these new therapies, particularly these GLP-1 medicines. And here's a plot of a recent publication we had tracking the expanding use of these medicines in Australia, where we're seeing about 500,000 people are using these every month at the moment, with about half of these in the private market. This data, this explosion is really recent, and so we actually need very contemporary data in order to fully understand how they're being used in the populations they're being used in. And similarly, there are huge emerging questions around safety, risks, and other benefits that are coming from these medicines, where we're getting signals emerging in the international space around conditions or outcomes such as rare vision loss or suicidality, pancreatitis, and even positive benefits such as cancer. There's a lot of uncertainty about the causative effect of these outcomes, but for new medicines, we need this linked hospital and medicines data in order to be able to scale up and join the international community in generating evidence and generating certainty for both patients and clinicians as they're using the medicines. This is a good point for me to hand over to my colleague Malcolm to talk about linking data at speed. But before I do, I'd just really like to acknowledge the co-authors in all of the work I've just presented now, as well as the funders and of course the data custodians and team support in terms of managing the governance and setting up the underlying data infrastructure. But I'll now hand over to Malcolm to talk about mapping adult ADHD medicine use in Australia.
Thanks, Michael. A hard act to follow as always. Could I have my first slide, please? All right, so you probably noticed the internet is chock-a-block with ADHD. I can see 5.5 million posts on TikTok there, and I know I'm showing my age by having to Google to see what's on TikTok, but so it goes. But also within my cohort of 50-somethings, late life ADHD diagnosis is a real phenomenon. Next slide, please. Well, this hasn't happened overnight. Our research group has a long-standing interest in the area, and 3 years ago, our colleague Claudia Bruno led this study looking at lisdexamfetamine for ADHD among Australian adults. The brand name of that is Vyvanse. So in 2021, there was a change to the subsidy, which broadened the access of adults with ADHD to this medicine. This is some data from her paper showing adult females in Australia, and you can see for 5 years there were slow but steady increases in utilisation of lisdexamfetamine, and then in the 12 months following the listing change, things just shot up. Next slide, please. AOHW, bless them, they're tracking ADHD medicines too. And on their website, they have this nifty interactive visualization, which includes data up until the middle of 2024. So I've picked out, again, adults, and scales are different to the last figure, but it's showing on the vertical scale here, patients per 1,000 population amongst males and females, and the red top line figure is all ADHD medicines. And you can see since about 2019-20, rates of these medicine use has just shot up. It's not just lisdexamfetamine, it's across all the different medicine groups that are used for ADHD. Next slide, please. Okay, now that I've set the scene, I'd just like to go back to February of this year. And within one of the world's most punishing inboxes, an email that looks something like this popped up. To cut a long story short, Norman Swan from the ABC had seen some maps of ADHD use, ADHD medicine use in Australia in the Australian Atlas of Healthcare Variation, and he wondered if our group had some updated statistics that he could use in his upcoming Four Corners report. Next slide. Well, we didn't have any analyses lying around, but the thought was, maybe we could come up with some. But it was 2 months until the planned broadcast. And for anyone who's done linked data research, you'd be asking yourself, well, would that even be possible? And we would have said no, except for the fact that a few months before this request came in, we'd had access to PLIDA approved. So next slide, please. It seems like ABS isn't allowed to do their own logos, so I've had to create this dodgy one for them. Please forgive me. Yeah, PLIDA was really the key enabler for this work. So a national linked data set, which includes medicines data, critically for this work. Next slide, please. So PLIDA includes data from the Australian Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme, and that's all subsidised prescriptions on the PBS for all Australians. And even better, it's updated quarterly with a 2-month lag from sort of real-time data. So about as fresh as you can get for PBS data. Furthermore, every year, linkages between the different data sets are updated. And so the key linkage there for us was PBS is linked to harmonised place of residence data. And this was the data that we needed to do an up-to-date snapshot of Australian ADHD medicine use and put it on a map. Next slide. Another key enabler was that this work was within scope of our existing ethics and governance approvals, which covered research for quality use of medicines. So that meant we didn't have to factor in a lengthy and unpredictable process to get project or amendment approvals. Thankfully, ABS and PLIDA data custodians also have a streamlined process for approving dissemination of work. They require a notification 2 weeks in advance of dissemination, but no actual stop-go approval. And in this case, we were able to give them an early heads up about the work we were doing, and we could reduce our lead times. So really what remained for us to factor in when we were trying to figure out how quickly we could get this analysis work done was the review process, which is where the ABS in this case looks at the outputs and ensures that they don't have any unacceptable disclosure risks. And ABS sets a 2-week benchmark for doing these reviews. Next slide. The third key factor, which made us feel comfortable with a 2-month timeline, was that we could use really solid documented methods to do the work. And these already dealt with the principles of safe outputs and disclosure control. As I mentioned, we extended an analysis from the Australian Atlas of Healthcare Variation, which is a publication of the Australian Commission for Safety and Quality in Healthcare. And the Atlas methods are all documented in detail on the AIHW Meteor website. The AIHW also provides detailed documentation of the ADHD utilisation statistics, which I showed graphed in an earlier slide. And finally, the ABS has a really excellent suite of documentation and data sets for the Australian Statistical Geography Standard, which combined with their population estimates provides the grounding that you need to do geostatistics. Next slide, please. All right, the final ingredient was some really powerful analytic technology. PLIDA is hosted on ABS Data Lab, which is a modern trusted research environment that contains up-to-date analytical software, and the VMs have good performance specs. On top of that, we used some modern database technology, which means that whole of population data pipelines run in a reasonable length of time. So that was DuckDB and the Parquet data format. Once we had the analysis done, we used the RTMap package, which allows you to create beautiful choropleth maps with very little code. Finally, we had access to the UNSW Digital Health Data Hub, to the Digital Health Hub, which is a facility where we could showcase our data visualizations for the ABC Four Corners team. Next slide, please. So this is the day of the shoot. You can see Michael and Norman there in front of the screen, Ryan, the cameraman from the Four Corners team, and then sitting off camera, Sally and me, watching it all unfold. So if you haven't already watched the Four Corners episode, our drug utilization statistics were just one part of the story, but we were very proud to have our work inform what was some serious journalism and a well-timed discussion about a significant health issue in Australia. Now I'd just like to take a slight tangent and showcase some of the results that were shown on the program. I've taken this visualization from the ABC website, but these are, again, our results. And these show some trends in ADHD medicine use in adults aged 20 to 65, split in two age bands, and also split by sex. And these are very similar to the AIHW results that I showed earlier, but they extend the analysis into the financial year 24-25 and show that the rapid growth that we've seen over the last 5 years is really ongoing. Also that growth among women is outpacing men in pretty much every age group. Thanks, Michael. Now the maps. This is a map showing how ADHD medicine use is varying across the country. So the different shades of green represent the variation in the number of adults aged 20 to 65 who were dispensed any ADHD medicine in the financial year 23 to 24. So we go down from pale green, which are rates as low as 0 to 500 per 100,000, all the way up to dark green, which is more than 4,000. So you can see that there's strong geographic variation. So that's at a national level. If we move on to within our major metro areas, that variation is reproduced there as well on a smaller scale. I'll focus on Sydney because that's where I'm from and I know the area as well. You can see on the left in dark green, we have the Blue Mountains, a little harder to see, but in the inner suburbs, we have a couple more very dark areas, and then a larger pale area towards the bottom left, which is southwest Sydney, the Fairfield area. And the variation in medicine use rates between the highest and the lowest there is about a factor of 7. So really quite striking. Next slide. On the right, we've got the really eye-popping results from Perth, which Norman Swan highlighted on the Four Corners program, and some also, similar but not as extreme variation in other capital cities. Next slide, please. And that really was in every major metro area throughout the country. All right, so we made it. We met our 2-month deadline, thanks to Plata's fresh data, efficient governance, and some powerful technology, along with excellent groundwork by the Commission, AIHW and ABS. We were able to go from idea to TV broadcast in 2 months and do it with recent data. A little bit about the impacts. As you'd suspect, there was a lot of interest in this topic, and we got a flood of media inquiries in the days that followed. More important to us, there was some really excellent policy impacts as well. So we had inquiries from government and regulators who are now, trying to tackle some of the underlying phenomena behind this variation. Furthermore, we are going to be disseminating our work in a more traditional format as well. First off the blocks is we'll be presenting it at the Asian Conference on Pharmacoepidemiology in November. All right, now I'd just like to return to Michael's introduction and say, well, do we now have to choose between linking at speed or linking across sectors? And the work we've done with PLIDA shows definitely linking at speed is now possible. And furthermore, we don't have access to NHDH yet, but it has also removed some barriers which were slowing down access to data for cross-sectoral linkage. All that said, there are still some remaining gaps. We'd like to see national coverage of private hospital data, and we'd like to see a speeding up of the data pipeline. And with all of that, we'll be able to do all the things that Michael outlined in his section of the talk. Next slide. So I'd like to thank a few people as well, particularly for the Four Corners work. I'd like to thank the Four Corners team, our contacts at the ABS, people at the Digital Health Hub at UNSW, Anna Byrne, and then, of course, the MedIntel team, our data manager, Mel Litchfield, and the PBS data custodians. And then finally, we have some fine print, including some disclaimers required by the ABS. So finishing up, I'd like to thank all of you for joining the seminar today and looking forward to the discussion, to your questions and comments. And I'll just hand back to Michael for a couple of final words.
Thank you very much, Malcolm, and thank you everyone for joining us. Feel free to get in touch with us if you'd like to discuss any of this more, or more broadly our research. That's either Medicines Intelligence Research Program, which is led by Sally Pearson, myself, or Malcolm, but also this Medicines Intelligence CRE. If you want to keep connected around the types of research or learn about upcoming events, feel free to join with the CRE in LinkedIn or send an email to the email address here. And also, I'm one of the co-conveners of the Pharmacoepidemiology Special Interest Group at the Australasian Epidemiological Association, AEA. If you're an AEA member, please join the SIG. It'd be wonderful to have you on board. Get in contact with us, myself or Kelly, who are co-convening, and we'd love to keep the discussion open and showcase some more of the great research on quality use of medicines across Australia. So thank you very much.
Right.
I'll now stop.